Kamala Harris is running a campaign that seems like they don't care if she wins. From the vice presidential selection of Governor Walz to the fact that she won't do interviews and she's offending the media, which is not a good strategy when you're a candidate. All of it looks like no one cares if she wins.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Steve Hilton Show. It's going to be a special episode today, which I've just decided we're going to do. Why? Because Susan Shelley is with us. We haven't spoken for ages. I don't know. I've been traveling, and for whatever reason, it's been a long time, feels like, that Susan's been our guest. And she always brings fantastic information about what's going on in California. And of course, now we have Kamala Harris running around trying to get elected president without doing any interviews or press conferences or anything else. There's a national aspect to all of this as well, because so much of what she represents is everything that's been going wrong here in California. So Susan is going to help us understand a lot of these questions. We've got a lot of stories to get through, and it's going to be the whole show today. And when we get into these subjects, wait till you hear the theory about why Gavin Newsom is pushing the most insane socialist policy, is all about the presidential election and how pissed off he is that Kamala Harris is the candidate. And so the whole thing, according to some, is a scheme to try and sabotage Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. We'll tell you all about it. So great to see you, Susan.
Great to see you, Steve.
Let's start with a story that, in some ways, to me, it captures the total dysfunction, and the word I've been using is decadence, of the ruling elite here in California, the one-party rule, Gavin Newsom as the governor, the legislature with a supermajority, and they are totally in shambles right now over particularly one policy area, which is it's such a sort of massive own goal in a way, because they're highlighting one of their biggest failures, which is their climate extremism, in particular in respect of oil and gas. And they're trying to have a special session to do some new policy. I mean, the whole thing, and they're arguing with each other. It's all squabbling in Sacramento. It's totally chaotic. And they're arguing over something that's a sort of disastrous policy anyway. Tell us what's been going on.
Well, it started a while ago. In 2022, the governor bragged that he had jammed his legislature. I had to jam my own legislature. He did this in New York at Climate Week festivities. And he bragged about jamming the legislature to pass 4 critical climate bills. And I don't think the legislature really appreciated that. They do these things at the very 11th hour of the session. They introduce bills 72 hours before they're going to vote on them, the bare minimum, and no one has time for debate or analysis, and it has these enormous consequences. And boom, it comes in. If you remember, the income-based electricity rates was done that way. That was another thing that was in a trailer bill at the very end of the budget process. Boom, right to the governor's desk and signed it. And after 6 months later, everyone's like, I didn't vote for that. Oh, yes, you did. And that is an example of how they've been doing energy policy in California. And most recently, the governor decided at the 11th hour that he wanted to regulate inventories for the oil companies through the California Energy Commission, which is a crazy proposal. Now, why is he doing this? He's already tried what was it? An excess profits tax. And that ended up being some regulatory thing through the California Energy Commission by the time it got through the sausage factory. And that's more burdens that cause higher gasoline prices, higher diesel fuel prices, higher prices for everything in California that's moved by truck, like food, for example. Chickens don't walk to the grocery store, sorry to say. And this is how the energy prices got so expensive in California. But of course, Gavin Newsom doesn't want to take responsibility for the policies that are making energy more expensive in California. He wants to blame the oil companies. So his latest gambit for blaming them is to say, well, if they had enough inventory, we wouldn't have these price spikes because inventory drops. So his solution is legislation dropped at the 11th hour with no warning to anybody. And out it comes, and it says the California Energy Commission would be empowered by regulation to tell the oil companies when they can do maintenance and compliance activities on their refineries and how much they have to hold in inventory, which is insane. And this whole thing, the California Energy Commission will be advised by a panel of experts. And who are the experts? Well, they're appointed by the governor, the Assembly Speaker, and the Senate Rules Committee. And we know how much they know about energy and policy. So Chevron has an executive who writes a letter to the California Energy Commission, a comment letter. That's how this works. When you have regulations, you write comment letters, which probably go in the trash. But he leaked it to the media, and Ashley Zavala at KCRA in Sacramento put it on Twitter. And here's this letter from Chevron that explains exactly how dangerous this is, that it will disrupt markets, that it will cause safety problems, to have regulators who know nothing about refinery maintenance ordering when the refinery maintenance has to happen. And by the way, this is one more layer on top of the summer blend, the winter blend, all the other regulations that are exclusive to California that they have to comply with. What they said is that it will not only affect California, but it will affect Nevada and Arizona, which depend on oil from California refineries. So this is overall an insane proposal. The Assembly was not interested in passing it at the end of the session. The Senate was willing to pass it at the end of the session, but they didn't get it done. And then the governor called a special session. And strangely, the Assembly said, okay, fine, we're in. And the Senate said, pound sand, we're not doing it. So you can't have legislation that's only passed by one house. That's not, at this moment, unless they override that somehow with some court decision, that's not going to work. So the Senate is obviously holding out for something. I'm not sure what exactly. This is all within the politics of the Democratic Party. This is a family fight. The Republicans have no role. They don't have enough votes to block a sidewalk. And this is a very interesting situation. They've introduced, I think, the new legislation that they want for the special session, but it's not going anywhere if the Senate won't play.
It's an amazing story. There's so much to it. That's why I'm so happy you laid it out so clearly and in such detail. There's so many angles to it. First of all, the total insanity of the policy. I mean, this is what we've come to. And by the way, the justification, why are they doing this? The theory is, because gas prices are too high. Why are gas prices so high in California? It's not they say the price gouging by the oil companies. We have the same oil companies here as in the rest of the country. Exactly. But our gas prices are massively higher. It's nothing to do with the oil companies. It's to do with their policies. I mean, first of all, the tax, right? So the gas tax is way higher here than anywhere else. And then, as you say, all these other regulations and the clamping down on domestic production here in California so that we're importing it. So all these factors, all their policies have made gas more expensive.
Yes.
It's the combination of their taxes that directly lift the price and the regulations that make it more expensive to produce and distribute and so on. So that's the first point. It's their policies that have caused it. Now they're saying, look at these terrible gas prices. We have to do something about it. And their solution is not to actually deal with the cause of the problem, which is their policies. It's to make it worse with even more stupid big government micromanagement of the private sector in a way that is so astonishing. I didn't even realize how bad it was. I mean, you have a committee of politicians sitting around deciding what happens in refineries. It's just insane. I mean,
very dangerous, very dangerous.
And it reminds me of, so much these days reminds me of 1970s Britain before Mrs. Thatcher's economic and union reforms. This is what it reminds me of. I mean, in those days, it was called corporatism, and the actual explicit idea that was in the then Labour government was this tripartite way of running the economy: government, unions, business, sitting around a table together, making business decisions. And we look at that, we think, well, that's insane. What are you talking about? That's been swept away into history. Just sort of crazy socialism that dragged Britain's economy down to the point where it was known as the sick man of Europe. And then in comes Margaret Thatcher with free market reforms. But this is what's happening here. And so this is not, and do you remember we talked about this, I'm sure. And I said, it's not going to end here. What does this remind us of? The fast food thing.
The Fast Food Council, yes.
Right. And that's the same kind of thing, wasn't it? Where you have the politicians and the unions and McDonald's having to sort of sit on a committee to run McDonald's restaurants in California. Now, I can't remember what happened to that. Was that the initial proposal, and then in the negotiations, that part of it was dropped, but McDonald's conceded the increase in the minimum wage for fast food? Is that what happened there?
That's something like that. I think what happened is the law passed, the fast food industry qualified a referendum, and negotiations began to pull the referendum off the ballot so that the voters wouldn't have the opportunity to defeat that law. And the way they negotiated it out is they kind of stuck it to the franchisees. One of the things in the law was the corporations would have liability for any labor violations at the local level. And they took the corporate liability part out of it. So the corporations were very happy with that, but the franchisees who were not at the table for the negotiations were stuck with this higher wage and the liability. And that was the deal that they made for a new piece of legislation. And it was all done with non-disclosure agreements, if you can believe that.
Yes, I remember. But it was the same sort of mindset, the same mentality, which is, oh, yes, it's perfectly normal and reasonable for politicians and bureaucrats to be part of the management, the day-to-day management of a company that they rig. It's so far left, and it's so unbelievable to me that this kind of, it's absolutely, straight out of the kind of old-fashioned 1970s socialist playbook.
Yes. And one of the things that's really troubling in the energy industry is that they have a long horizon for building energy infrastructure. Right. So it could take, they said, a decade to build a storage tank to meet these requirements. It costs $35 million. But interestingly, what this Chevron executive, Andy Walls, mentioned is the declaration, the proclamation, the executive order by the governor to stop the sale of gas-powered vehicles by, I think, 2035. Now, when I hear something like a proclamation like that, I think, yeah, politics, never going to happen. But interestingly, energy investors have to take that into account. Bond underwriters have to take that into account. That's going to be the law in California. They have to assume. They can't assume that we're going to be sensible all of a sudden and repeal this nonsense. They have to assume that stays. So now they're penciling out how much money they can make back to pay for these investments. And they're thinking, well, that doesn't pencil out at all because they're going to stop the sale of gas-powered vehicles. And here's how the sales are going to go. And we're not going to be able to get our money back. It is affecting long-term energy infrastructure in California, which is very hard to put back in the bottle once you get that genie out. It's how are you going to all of a sudden build something that takes 10 years? So it's very troubling.
And so is that another factor in price rises today, where
Probably.
They're saying, look, we're still, this is the point about all this, like I say this the whole time, fine, let's have an energy transition, right? Transition to clean energy, perfectly fine. But, when we've built up the capacity for a sort of reliable alternative that's affordable, and they're trying to sort of this headlong rush is so reckless. And it's not just that we won't be ready. So what you're saying is that because this is going to really hit them, the oil industry and the gas industry, in not that far away. I mean, it's sort of decade away.
Right.
They're sort of compensating for that hit, that financial hit later, by adding to the price rises now. So yet again, it's the Democrat policies that are causing the price rises.
You're shortening the period of time in which you can recoup the investment and making California, quote, uninvestable for energy infrastructure.
That uninvestable word, that was Kevin O'Leary. I heard him talk about that recently, Mr. Wonderful, as he's known. Kevin O'Leary, he's been a very, very, I've noticed he's been a very, smart commentator on what's going on in California. And he makes this point recently. He's been very vocal on it, keeps making this point, so that I won't back companies now in California. It just doesn't make sense. It's uninvestable. Their policy, I think he used the word, the taxation and the regulation is insane. And this is insane. We're just talking about it. There's another aspect to it. I want to get into the squabbling, the sort of the fact that they're falling out with each other and the shambles. I mean, if this was Republicans behaving, let's just imagine that this was happening at the federal level during the Trump administration. And you had, the equivalent would be Donald Trump, wants to do some kind of executive order and command Congress to do something. And, let's go back to the sort of names from the past, just sort of put them in various. So Kevin McCarthy, because it's all controlled by the same party. Kevin McCarthy says, yes, we'll have a session. And Mitch McConnell says, no way, we're not doing it. And everyone's just falling out with each other. It would be portrayed in the media as total shambles, chaotic. These people don't know how to run anything. And yet it's going on right now in California and barely anyone's even covering it.
Well, interestingly, the structure of our government is designed to prevent crazy policies from becoming enacted by dividing up the power and separating those functions, so that you have to have buy-in from two different houses that are elected on different lengths of terms. The senators in California are 4 years, the assembly members are 2 years, the governor is 4 years and term limited after 2 terms. So everybody has their own political considerations, and that's a good thing if it puts the brakes on stupid policies. Yes. We need more brakes on stupid policies in California.
Good point. So let's just now, I want to get into some of the sort of the background to this, because I've heard a couple of things that are just really interesting. And again, to me, it's also decadent. This is what you get with one party rule, the arrogance of power. It's never about, none of this is about actually helping people. It's about their pushing forward either ideological priorities or the priorities of their interest groups, their activists, the union donors, whoever it may be. These days, it's all very kind of internal. Not like they're not sitting around thinking, well, how do I help people? So one of the explanations I heard was the Senate guy, Mike McGuire, in the California Senate. He's fighting back against Newsom on this because he was really pissed off at the way Gavin Newsom tried to jam them on this crime legislation.
Yes.
Do you remember this was a couple of months ago where
that was another example? Yes.
Right. And they were trying to scupper the reform ballot initiative, which was a reform Prop 47, which did get on the ballot in the end and did survive all their attempts to kill it. It's on the ballot now, Prop 36. We'll talk about that nearer the time. So they didn't succeed, but part of the process was to have this package of bills that would invalidate it. Do you remember all this? The poison pill, whatever.
Yeah.
And apparently the Senate leader, Mike McGraw, was really annoyed about all of that. And the thing he was most annoyed about was that Gavin Newsom was, whipping, saying, you've got to do this, you've got to pass these bills, it's vital, whatever. And then suddenly, literally overnight, dropped it all. Because he had to, I'm trying to remember.
He had to go to New Hampshire.
He had to go to New Hampshire
to support Joe Biden. He had to go. He had to get on a plane and go. I think he was in New Hampshire, and was he in Boston? He was in several states,
right,
campaigning for Joe Biden, and right in the middle of the time-limited negotiations to get whatever it was he was trying to get done. He was making everyone take tough votes. He was pressuring everyone, and then he got on a plane and he left. He just lost interest in it.
I know, and so that's one theory, that he's just really annoyed. This guy in the Senate, Mike McGuire, the leader of the Democrats in the state Senate, just was so annoyed about all of that. The next time Gavin Newsom comes and asks for something, he says, "No, sorry, not doing it," purely out of personal pique.
You can't rule that out.
That's interesting. That's what it's come to. That it's this sort of totally decadent. It's just they've completely lost sight of what they're there to do, which is advance the public interest. It's all about their personal feuds. The second one, which is an even more brilliant personal feud type thing, and I don't know if this is true, but it's just so delicious. I have to sort of get your reaction to it. Somebody said to me this, and I was in Sacramento yesterday. We're taping this on Thursday morning, and this is on Wednesday. I was up there. We did an event with Gloria Romero. Gloria is going to be joining us on the show next week, who is the former Senate leader. We've been talking about Mike McGuire, right? Well, that was years ago, Gloria Romero. She was the majority leader in the Senate, Democrat for many years, left the party, joined the Republican Party. She's on my organization, Golden Together. We're very, very close colleagues. And I worked on this with her and we did the event together. So I was there in Sacramento. So I was hearing people talk about this special session thing. And one of the theories is that the whole plan, going back to the policy, this is Gavin Newsom deliberately screwing up the energy situation in the western states in order to cause a problem in Arizona and Nevada, just as you said, Susan, it will, the oil industry is saying, look, this is going to disrupt supply, not just in California, but in neighboring Western states. Arizona and Nevada, of course, vital swing states in the presidential election. Gavin Newsom, furious that Kamala is the candidate and not him, and desperate to stop her because his only hope of becoming president is if she loses. So he's deliberately doing this in order to have a problem in Arizona and Nevada with gas prices, so she loses the election. That's the theory I heard.
Well, that's wild. Certainly it's the case that everyone who wants to be president in the Democratic Party wants Kamala Harris to lose. I mean, that's just politics. They want a clear field in 2028. That's in their interest. So they're not going to say it, of course, but that's in their interest. And that's always the case, that they want to get rid of the people who are in front of them. I think Kamala Harris is doing a pretty fine job of losing the election on her own. Uh, I watched her get off a plane and duck the media with her earbuds and then holding up the phone on top of the earbuds just to pretend that she was on the phone so she could just wave at the media and get on the plane without answering any questions. It's just
so ridiculous.
The
whole thing is such an insult to everyone's intelligence. I mean, it really is. And the idea that you can have this, I mean, it's just astonishing, really, the sheer kind of brazen shamelessness of it, that they really are going to try and go through with this, to have someone become president without going through a primary, without going through any kind of, proper internal process or following their party procedures, without doing an interview, really. She'd won that pathetic CNN thing. No press conference, no policy platform, nothing. One debate. And they really are going to try and go through it. I mean, I remember talking about on Fox with on various shows after the CNN debate, which was about a week ago, wasn't it? And people were describing it as her first interview. I said, yeah, and it could well be her last. I mean, the only one. That's not inconceivable at this point. It's unbelievable.
Well, I have a theory that what the Democrats were trying to do is just carnival barker enough Democrats to the polls in California to get people to vote in the congressional races. I think all they're trying to do at this point is win back the House by a margin that they can sustain a few votes here and there and have enough power to continue their grift of lobbying and insider trading and the rest of the stuff that they get for having power. If they lose the House, the Senate, and the White House, there's a lot of Democrats that won't get their calls returned when they call for money. And I honestly think that that's what's going on here. Kamala Harris is running a campaign that seems like they don't care if she wins. From the vice presidential selection of Governor Walz, who has so many problems politically, to the fact that she won't do interviews and she's offending the media, which is not a good strategy when you're a candidate. All of it looks like no one cares if she wins. And as you mentioned, people like Gavin Newsom don't care if she wins. They'd rather she didn't. So they're not out campaigning for her.
Yes, so the House, that's very interesting. And it's true that there are really tight, the tightest races and the highest number of them on this year are here in California. You've got John, I mean, we're going to have these candidates on the show. You've got John Duarte, David Valadeo. You've got Ken Calvert in Orange County, Mike Garcia, in sort of LA, just northeast of LA. You've got Michelle Steele. There's a whole bunch of them.
Michelle Steele, Young Kim. There's
they really think. I know. I've heard from them. They believe that they're going to win some of these back. Now, the Republican Party and the candidates, they're feeling pretty confident. We'll see. But there's huge amounts of money pouring into these races.
Mm-hmm. And if you look back at Bernie Sanders' support in California, he almost won the California primary away from Hillary Clinton in 2016. He did very well here. So those voters are the ones you would be targeting with these crazy communist policies that she's throwing out there. She's going to lose swing state after swing state with policies like, yes, we're going to tax unrealized capital gains. Oh, are you? But that kind of a wealth tax proposal probably will bring out the Bernie Sanders, I think it's intended to bring out the Bernie Sanders voters in California in these congressional districts. That's
so just explain, just while we're on that, just explain that policy and how it would actually affect real people.
Oh, it's insane. Well, first of all, they're starting out by saying it only affects people who are super rich, so don't worry, you're pretty little head about it. But every tax policy starts on the super rich, don't worry about it, and then it comes all the way down. That's what happened with income tax. That's what happened with the Social Security withholding. It went up and up and up on more and more income. It starts on someone else and it comes to get the middle class because that's where the money is. So what a wealth tax would do is it would tax you on the appreciated value of your assets, even though you hadn't sold them and realized the gains. So if your house has appreciated in California, which is pretty common, you could have bought a house for $500,000 and it could be worth $1 million too 10 years later. They would be taxing you on the appreciated value of your real estate, even though you didn't sell it and you don't have the cash to pay those taxes.
Wait a minute. They can't. At what point? Not what, annually, or when is it assessed?
Well, the way they've proposed it in California, and it was proposed as, I think it was ACA 3, Assembly Constitutional Amendment 3, and then it had companion legislation. The legislation said it only affects people with $50 million in assets, but the constitutional amendment didn't say that. The constitutional amendment says the legislature can define wealth and tax it. So they could tax the appreciated value of your real estate. It would go through the franchise tax board, not the property tax system, and it would be like an income tax. And they would make you pay with a check, you have to send them the money, a tax on the appreciation of your assets. Potentially, that kind of thing could hit 401k accounts and other investments that you haven't sold.
Every year, so they assess the level of your wealth every year.
Exactly. Every year you have to do documentation to show what it's worth.
This is madness.
It's communism, and that's what the proposal is. Now, who is that targeted at? Is that going to win Pennsylvania? I don't think so, but it will bring out the Bernie Sanders voters who think everybody who owns a house is rich.
But this is the thing about all of this stuff is just the sheer bureaucracy involved. I mean, even if you thought it was a good idea, I mean, that everyone has to sort of document their and then the government's going to pour all over it and say, well, this portfolio of shares went up by so that's what they're talking about. Everything,
in the case in California, this wealth tax proposal was all your global assets. So you have to go value things all around the globe. I don't know, currency valuations. I don't know how you even do that. It doesn't matter. It's never going to happen. In fact, Gavin Newsom was pretty upset because the Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial saying this was being considered in California, just as he was announcing his budget proposal, I think in January. And he was all just bent out of shape at the Wall Street Journal. But that afternoon, there was actually a hearing on the bill. So the Wall Street Journal wasn't wrong. Now, the Democratic chairman of the committee stuck a pillow over its face and suffocated the thing, sent it to some committee, what did they call it? The suspense file, which they didn't even have. They didn't have a suspense file, but she invented a suspense file and she shoved that wealth tax right into it, and it's not been heard from since. But here's Kamala Harris proposing it nationally.
So just to be really clear, because I think I follow these things quite closely. So the tax on unrealized capital gains, that is the wealth tax.
Right. That's a wealth tax.
But they're not calling it a wealth tax for some reason. Why aren't they called? Because there's also a separate, you hear Elizabeth Warren, for example, talking about a wealth tax. I think she's even introduced legislation, hasn't she?
I believe she did.
But this is why aren't they? But it's the same point. It is an actual wealth tax, but they're not calling it that.
Well, that would be, I'm sure, a polling-driven decision on what they call it and what people perceive from what they call it. But it's an insane policy. It probably could never be successfully implemented, even if it was enacted. And it's communism to go and say, you have something and we're taking it and we're going to give it to someone else that we select. Everyone's entitled to that money.
But this is the point I think is very important to understand with all this stuff. And it applies to the next one we're going to talk about, which we've covered a bit, but I think it's very important for everyone to understand the point I'm going to make. Even if these things don't end up seeing the light of day for whatever procedural reason or whatever, or someone in the system blocks it, the fact that they're promoting them, that they're pushing them forward, reveals their mindset and their intent and the way they think about things. And
True.
So if they are prepared to even propose these things, that tells you something about how far left they've gone. And that means that in more hidden ways, if you put them in power, in the sort of everyday administration of the government, not necessarily a new bill or a new policy, just the sort of daily decision making that all piles up and affects us in our daily lives. That's the mindset that they're bringing to it.
That's
You've
right.
got people who are really far left and really sincerely see no problem with these vast expansions and intrusions of the role of government. And so, okay, fine, this particular proposal, not going to happen now, but all the other things that are going on that we never even see because they're sort of behind closed doors decisions on various things. And the next policy I want to talk about a little bit in this category is and we've discussed it before on the show, it's such an outrage, which is, what is it, AB 1840, which is the California bill. And again, as with so many things, it starts in California, it doesn't end here. Other states are now considering it, I've noticed, to give free taxpayer-funded down payment assistance to illegal immigrants when we have the highest housing costs in the country. The last time I looked at the numbers, the typical house price, the median house price in California, over $900,000. Only 15% of people can afford that. So they've, again, the direct result of Democrat policies, the environmental regulations, the taxes they put on house building, they call it impact fees, on and on. We've talked about it before. So they've made housing really expensive and say, oh, housing's so expensive, people can't afford housing. We'd better give them money to help them buy houses that we've made so expensive. So where's the money come from? Higher taxes, which of course makes everything else more expensive. But the real outrage is now they've extended this scheme to, and this has passed the legislature, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. It's on the governor's desk.
Illegal immigrants. So it was a pre-existing scheme, and they've extended it to people who literally just showed up illegally. It's amazing.
It's a very strange vote because there is no money in the program, so nobody's getting anything. And
Right.
also, you have to meet the requirements for a Fannie Mae standard mortgage, a first mortgage. The way this works is you're qualified for up to $150,000 of down payment assistance, but it's a second mortgage, and you have to pay it back. And not only do you have to pay it back when you sell the house, but you have to pay a share of your appreciation. They call it the Homebuyer Assistance Shared Appreciation Plan. It's got a name like that. So here's how this works. You have to meet the California Housing Finance Authority income limit, which at the highest one I saw, I think, was Orange County, $204,000 a year. Well, if you have household income of $204,000 a year before taxes, you can afford, according to Bankrate's affordability calculator, a home that's about $860,000, maximum $1.2 million. Good luck finding it, but let's say you find it. You can't exceed your income limit. Now you're going to pay the principal and interest, which could be as much as $7,300 a month. And you're going to have to pay on top of that property taxes and insurance, which is rising. And then, the little luxuries like electricity and water. You have to pay all of that. Now, what's going to happen to these home buyers, illegal immigrant or not, who get this assistance with the down payment? And congratulations, here are your keys, and here's your first month's bill. How long can they sustain that?
Yeah.
Since they have to meet income limits in order to even qualify for the program. The whole thing is crazy.
It's another, okay, so it proves the point, which is this is not about sensible policymaking that solves a problem. It's about sending a message. And the message they want to send with this, and again, this is what's important to remember, even if it's waiting for Newsom to sign it, right? This particular one. It's been passed, but and even if he vetoes it, but this is how they think. This is, they don't see anything offensive about the idea that you've got, because in the end, it's going to be taxpayer money, isn't it? Isn't that where the 150?
It absolutely is taxpayer. California.
I heard something about, well, it's one of them was saying, well, it's not taxpayer money because it comes out of some fund.
No.
But
It's
taxpayer
money. The money in the fund comes from the legislature, which comes from your pocket.
Got it. Okay, so that's just spin. It's taxpayer money. So just in broad terms, here's what they're proposing. Even if it doesn't actually make sense, well, none of it makes it. This is what they're proposing. You've got millions of hardworking, working class, low middle class people in California who can't afford to buy a home. They work incredibly hard, 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs. And in particular, you see this in the working class Latino community. And I'm spending a lot of time there now. And incredibly, people who've been here for decades, working really hard to try and get that California dream. And they're paying their taxes. And so what are the Democrats doing? Taking that tax money from these incredibly hardworking people who are unable to buy a house, which is their dream, because they've made housing so expensive. And they're going to take money from those people and hand it to illegal immigrants who've just got here. That's their values. I mean, it's so,
That's their values.
It's so cruel and heartless, actually. They
It's
probably
horrible.
think it's a compassionate policy. Oh, we must treat, undocumented people it's not compassionate. It's the opposite. It's cruel to say to people, we don't care. You work hard, can't afford a house. We're going to take your money. We're going to give it to these people who have arrived more recently, illegally, in order to buy the house that you can't afford.
That's right. No, it's a terrible policy. But it's kind of a hollow policy because it's very limited and it's really
Right.
not help. It's not going to help anybody. It only started in 2023. It's probably just going to be completely tanked because it's totally impractical. It's just
Yeah, but it
ridiculous.
shows where they're coming from. This is my point.
Yes, it does.
I want to come back to this. It's just like the other one I think is in this category is the Senator Shannon Grove's, valiant work to try and actually, by the way, this is a Kamala Harris story here, which is to reverse these downgradings of various offenses, which happened. I think that was Prop 57, wasn't it? They downgraded all these offenses from felonies and what the category of serious and violent crimes in order to have fewer people in jail. This is a strategy of ideology of decarceration. And the whole category of them were sex crimes. For example, things like, sex trafficking of children. And Shannon Grove, and she's been, chipping away at these different things, buying a minor for sex, trafficking a minor, all these things. She's introduced a few bills in the last few years to try and upgrade, to make them what they should be, which is serious and violent crimes. And the Democrats blocked it in the legislature. Blocked it year after. And in the end, the outcry was so great. Gavin Newsom could see the PR damage. And at that time, he was still, contemplating, I guess, a presidential campaign this year, and said, no, and just came down and said, sorry, you've got to reverse this, and forced them in the end to pass her bill. But the fact that for so long, that's what they were trying to do, it reveals their mindset. Even if the outcome in the end was the right one, the fact that they were even thinking like this tells you a lot about who they really are and what their values are.
Absolutely. And one of the things that they've done that really hurts California taxpayers, and not only taxpayers, but it hurts everyone who's on the Medi-Cal program, is they expanded full scope Medi-Cal, not the restricted scope Medi-Cal, which is for pregnancy and emergencies, which is what all the states provide. Full insurance, full scope Medi-Cal at California taxpayer expense exclusively, no federal match, to all undocumented immigrants in California. And they said, oh, this is what it's going to cost. It's going to affect this many people, and this is what it's going to cost. They have no idea what it's going to cost. It's an entitlement program. Everyone who is here is entitled to sign up for it, and then they can have whatever they need when they go for medical care. And it's entirely on the California taxpayer. And that's an example of what you're talking about. So even if we had all the money in the world, here's the problem. There aren't enough doctors who will take those extremely low reimbursements. I think it's fifth from the bottom on the list of the 50 states that California reimburses for medical care. We have very high costs here, so it's even worse than it looks. Doctors won't see enough Medi-Cal patients for the 14 million people in California who are on this program, which is supposed to be for the lowest income people who need the safety net of government health insurance. 14 million people, a third of the state, are falling in that category.
Wow.
And they expanded the program, full scope Medi-Cal coverage, to all undocumented immigrants, regardless of age or how long they've been here or anything.
It's amazing. Again, just the recklessness of it. And
Yes.
then, and again, the point is not that the alternative to that is the sort of cruel, inhumane, people are going to be dying in the street with no, there is other states have this kind of basic backstop medical coverage
Right.
What do you get? The restricted version.
Restricted scope, and that's court ordered. That's from the Supreme Court. You can't refuse emergency care, pregnancy care, different types of communicable disease treatment, things like that. That's part of restricted scope Medi-Cal, paid by the taxpayers, 50% by the states, 50% by the federal government. That's how it was. But California, pandering to the illegal immigrant vote, I wonder who are they pleasing with this policy? They expanded it first to children, then to older people, then to everyone in the middle. And now every undocumented immigrant who walks into California can have full scope Medi-Cal insurance, just like a person who is working and in poverty, who has lived here forever, a citizen or a permanent legal resident, the same insurance. And the doctors are not available, so the waits are very long. And the problem here is that it is taking away from people who most need these services, and it's taking from the taxpayers to pay for this. Why are they doing it?
Well, we got some explanation of that from Nancy Pelosi herself. Let's watch the clip. She was on with Bill Maher, and Bill Maher was outraged about the policy we just discussed. The home ownership one, the down payment assistance. Put that to like, come on, this is too much, isn't it? This is crazy. Bill Maher was saying, and here was her answer.
California's always in the lead. Maybe others will follow that lead, but that's up to those states. But we're very blessed here with beautiful diversity.
So you'd vote for this law?
Excuse me?
So you'd vote for this law?
Well, I'm not familiar with exactly what it is, but making the American dream of home ownership available to all people is something we have to do for people who are here now.
This is before you're a citizen. This is undocumented. This is for the undocumented.
Well, what I would like to do is move them to documented.
So she just says it straight out. I want them to be documented. That's the answer. And so you have Kamala Harris saying, and of course that's what she said in when she was running for president last time, that people shouldn't be. It's basically legalizing illegal immigration. She put her hand up. They all agreed that, and so that's actually what they think. And so now, because of course that's unpopular, you have Kamala Harris now. I think it was one of the points put to her in the CNN interview, but with absolutely no follow up. Kamala Harris had this verbiage about, well, no, I think if people, there should be consequences. That was the term she used. There should be consequences, but she didn't say what those consequences should be. She didn't say whether or not she still believes that you effectively decriminalize illegal immigration. So we still don't really know. And Nancy Pelosi was very clear. She does want to do that. That's their position.
Well, that's really shocking. And the people who are hurt by that policy are the people at the lower end of the income scale who depend on government assistance, who depend on subsidized housing, who depend on food stamps. Those people are hurt by bringing in 7 million, 12 million, we don't even know how many illegal immigrants, and whatever category they stamp on the paperwork to say, oh, well, this is an asylum request, or this is a parole program from something from the 1970s that we're reinterpreting, and now we're going to say everyone's paroled into the United States and they have the right to be here for 2 years. That was a widely expanded program by the Biden administration that was supposed to be case by case, and now it's just huge. They do these things. They create this backdoor immigration reform, essentially, legalizing everybody. But who is hurt by it? The people who are here, who depend on government services, who find that everything's oversubscribed, that the schools are too crowded, that the housing isn't available, that
this is the argument
medical
that
providers
needs to be
are not
made.
available.
Exactly. It's a really important argument. Sorry to cut you off, Susan, but it's so important. And I think Republicans need to understand this in how they make these arguments, because superficially, that's how the Democrats, as I noted earlier, they present these policies that are so extreme as compassionate. We need to be compassionate for these poor people from around the world, need shelter and asylum, and we need to be compassionate. But it's not compassionate, because you've got people here who are struggling very much, and they are the ones who are being hurt by this. It's cruel. It's a cruel and heartless policy. It is not compassionate.
That's true. And it hurts the people who are least able to cope with
The
it.
poorest and the most vulnerable. Exactly. Let's move on to something that I know. And again, it's been a while since we spoke. And all this, the Kamala mania has taken off. And one of the things I saw you point out, because you're so good at being precise and accurate about all these things, and I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a while, which is the ballot initiative. Going back to Kamala Harris when she was State Attorney General in California, and her role in ballot initiatives. And of course, the way it works, and we've talked about this before, is that the Attorney General, which is ludicrous, by the way, writes what's called the title and summary that goes on the ballot and describes what people are voting for. When we have a perfectly, reasonable and obvious alternative, which is the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is actually pretty independent and constantly puts out reports that are unhelpful to the Democrats in charge. So, they really are pretty objective. They could perfectly well do this, but they don't. The Attorney General, a partisan elected politician, writes these things. So she did that. One of the things that said is that she was the one, Kamala Harris, who wrote this the totally cynically misleading summary for Prop 47 that legalized theft up to $950 and so on, all the things that we talk about often. She was the one that called it, what is it, the Safe Neighborhoods and Communities Act?
Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, I think it
was. All right. But that's not quite right, is it? So tell us the actual, I want people to be well informed. So tell us exactly what happened.
That was the title that was used by the proponents of the initiative measure. And that was the title that was used in the advertising, the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. But actually, what it was called on the ballot was something like affects criminal sentencing. It was something very neutral like that. But the summary that she wrote did make it sound very favorable. And as if it was only going to affect people who were being harassed for drug crimes that many people in California didn't even think should be crimes. And they were being tagged with felonies for multiple offenses on things like that. She kind of made it sound like it wasn't any big change. But actually, it was a very significant change to everything in California. And it created what many people perceived to be out of control retail theft and drug use and homelessness on the streets because of all of the above. So.
Yeah. Which brings us to, the present day when we're now we've had 10 years of dealing with the consequences, hence Prop 36 this year, which is very important that it passes, which undoes some of the damage. But going back to Kamala Harris and the ballot initiative, so that's, we now know the accurate story on Prop 47, but actually there's another initiative that isn't talked about so often to do with public sector unions,
yes,
where she had a really negative and harmful role. Tell us about that.
There was a very important pension reform initiative that was going to be done that would have really helped California's long-term finances. And she decided to give it a title and summary that made it sound like it was essentially kicking grandparents out of the house. She just made it sound like, oh, this is going to destroy pensions. The title and summary was so negative that she wrote that the proponents pulled the measure. They wouldn't even go forward with it because they
thought there's no way we can pass this.
Right. She made it sound like a terminal illness. And it was a very thoughtful and reasonable pension reform, and it was killed by Kamala Harris's title and summary.
So the point there is that this issue of the massive fiscal favors done for the government unions in exchange for their political donations is a huge factor in the high taxes we all pay, because it's a bigger and bigger part of the budget, paying out what I always describe as luxury pensions and healthcare, where government unions get deals that just no one who's not in the government union would even imagine getting on pensions and healthcare. I mean, they way beyond they went on and on about how Obamacare was so brilliant, way beyond that, and other neighboring states don't give these more than generous. I mean, it's just giveaway luxury pensions and healthcare. And of course, it's the donations that she and other Democrats get in exchange that makes them do this. It's totally corrupt, but it's bankrupt in California.
It absolutely is. And the way that the powerful unions and special interests do this, the way that they own these politicians, is in the primaries. They essentially say, I'll give you $10 million to run, and if you don't do what we want, I'm going to give the $10 million to somebody to run against you. That's sort of the mechanism. And they control the politicians through the donations. And what's sad is that the donations are coming from the individual members of the unions who are essentially required to pay them. There's a process for not paying it, but it's very difficult and convoluted and complicated, and there's a lot of pressure not to go along with that. So they are paying out of their check to the unions, and the unions are using the money to buy politicians for things that may be unrelated to the interests of the union members and that they may not even agree with. And in fact, the Supreme Court said that they can withdraw from a public sector union and not pay anything. It used to be the case that they had to pay something equivalent to dues. That was
the Janus ruling, wasn't it?
Right, that was the Janus ruling, and the public, I believe, public sector unions have declined in membership following that decision. But in California, they're still extremely powerful, and they control the government.
Well, totally control the government. As I hear, and when I'm in Sacramento and you talk to people about, why can't we do this reform or that reform? And they say, well, the unions won't accept it. And I say, well, so what? I mean, why? Why doesn't anyone push back against the unions? And I hear it all the time from actual legislators. I've heard it from. Well, because they run this place. I mean, it's just outrageous. It's so offensive. And these are the people that lecture us about our democracy. Last point I just want to get to with you. It's an LA story, but again, it shows what we have all the time now with Democrats here, these extremists, which is the triumph of ideology over any kind of practicality or common sense. This is about, is it renewable energy? What's this LA story?
The LA story is that the city council decided we should have 100% renewable energy in the city of Los Angeles for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which is controlled by the city council. It's a city-owned utility. And the cost of this, according to the ratepayer advocate, is going to raise electricity bills by at least 7.7% per year by 2035. It's just going to go up and up and up. They had one scenario where what's currently costing $144 would be up to $550.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was based on monthly usage of 700 kilowatt hours, I think. They were taking averages, and this doesn't include all the other charges that are on the bill. This is just one portion of it. But essentially, this fantasy of getting to 100% clean energy, which can never happen, is going to raise your bills while they try to get to 100% clean energy and actually are still using natural gas, nuclear, hydropower, other things that don't count as renewable in California. It's just monstrous how expensive this is.
And are they going to do this, or is this just an idea?
This is the law in Los Angeles.
Oh, they've passed it.
They're going through with it, and the ratepayer advocate said they should stop and reconsider the costs of this policy. We'll see if they do.
It's just unbelievable. I mean, everywhere you look, it's crazy. And again, let's bring it back to the national picture for our national audience. This is the Kamala Harris ideology in action. All this stuff. This is what this is where she grew up politically. This is what you're going to get if you vote for Kamala Harris for president. And people really need to understand how far left and extreme it is.
They do. And they need to take a look at what we're paying in California for gasoline, diesel fuel, electricity, and see that the reason for this is policies like the Green New Deal that Kamala Harris supports. This is the reason we're paying so much in California. If it goes national, the whole country will be paying more for electricity and gasoline. No one's going to be happy, and it doesn't accomplish anything. The thing that people really need to understand about these climate-driven policies is that they're all for show. They don't do anything for the climate. They make no difference at all. And if you pin a politician in California to the wall and tell them that, they agree and they say, yes, but California must show world leadership.
Exactly. It's all about that. It's exactly right. They say, well, we have to sort of, punish our citizens in order to look virtuous when we go to a conference in Geneva or something.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just outrageous.
Have our picture taken in Paris. We have to do this.
Literally. That's what it's about. Leadership.
Californians are paying a very high price for politicians to have their picture taken in Paris. And everybody needs to know that the policies they think they support are causing the problems that they're having.
Great summary. So next time, just for our agenda, because there's so much going on, we haven't had time to get to it today. I just want to make this point while we're talking about costs and taxes and so on. At the exact time when we have all these massive increases in our costs, both through policies that affect energy prices and so on, electricity we've just been discussing, or directly through higher taxes, at the exact same time that's happening, and we have the highest taxes in the country, this November on the ballot will be a whole bunch of new tax increases, worse than tax increases because they're bonds, and that means that you pay the interest as well long term. So it's worse than just a straightforward tax increase. Plus,
Yes.
a lot of the money is siphoned off to financial institutions in the wheeler dealing that makes these bonds happen. And these bonds that they're talking about on the ballot, statewide, regional, some of them are local bonds, tax increases, they're for things that you would think are sort of core functions of government. Some of it's infrastructure, schools. There's a big one, Prop 2 for school building, on and on. These bonds, which are basically we already pay the highest taxes, and now they're coming for more to pay for things. Well, where's the money going? Where's the money gone that we've already given them?
An excellent point. Someone mentioned to me that the schools in Oakland have lead in the water. Now, I want to know why the schools in Oakland still have lead in the water after the tens of millions or billions of dollars that have been spent on school modernization, safety. They've been trying to take the lead and the asbestos out of the schools since, I think, the 1990s, maybe longer. If there's still lead and asbestos in the schools, who's going to prison for it? Because this shouldn't be happening. With all the money that we have put into this, where are the priorities for the spending, and where is the accountability?
Well, we just answered that question, I think, in the conversation about government, union, pensions, and healthcare. That's where the money's going. It's so corrupt. We'll get into it in detail because everyone needs to know this before they vote. And of course, with this ridiculous election season we now have, the votes, you're going to be voting pretty soon. We've just passed Labor Day. Election starts, the ballots go out just in a few weeks here in California. In some parts of the country, I think they're in the mail, tomorrow. It's ridiculous. Anyway, that's for another time because everyone needs to really understand about these bonds, which are being completely, missold. And we just can't have any more tax increases. It's just too much. We need to cut taxes, not raise them. All right, Susan, that's it. That's all we have time for. We could go on for another hour, but it's been great to have this time to talk to you in detail about all these things. So informative as always. Thank you, Susan Shelley.
Thank you. Great to be with you.